It's like your brain overloads and you just can't think anymore. Like your head is about to explode. The lights, the sounds, everything. It's just too much.
Okay.
I've always felt lonely. I never really participated in life. I guess people just tolerated me. It's hard to put into words what it feels like to be on the outside, looking in.
I remember how desperate I felt at the age of 3 because I couldn't speak. I understood the words people said to me, but I couldn't force a single word out in response. It felt like an extreme case of stuttering, and it drove me mad. I vividly remember thinking logically and realizing that the only way I could communicate was to scream.
Plastic. It isn't just the trash that we see on the streets or in our oceans. It's already inside of us. Inside of our bodies, our homes, our children. I know this not only as an inventor working on a plastic to fuel recycling method, but as someone who sees and cares about how this affects every single one of us as humans. When you look at the world around you, you can't help but wonder, what kind of future are we creating for ourselves and for our future generations to come? Today, I want to discuss what's really hidden behind the plastic pollution, and more importantly, how microplastics and nanoplastics are affecting our health. Autism spectrum disorder is just the tip of the iceberg. Projections suggest that within a generation, 1 in every 2 children may be diagnosed with it. But the most frightening part is that these aren't just statistics. These are real lives, real people, and real stories. That's only a fraction of the problem. Micro and nanoplastics are infiltrating our bodies, our organs, and even our brains. They weaken our immune system, impact childhood development, and pose a serious threat to our overall health. We have created this trap for all of humanity, and now we have to find a way out together.
The year 1911. Swiss scientist Eugen Bleuler first introduced the term autism, meaning isolated self. At the time, it was linked to schizophrenia. Time passes. In the 1970s, Dr. Darold Treffert studied autism and concluded that it is an extremely rare phenomenon, affecting fewer than 1 in 10,000 children. But something changed in the late 80s. In America, the number of autism cases began to rise.
I will say that 1 in 36, that's not a pandemic, then what is? 1 in 36, and it used to be 1 in 10,000 have autism now?
Over the past 50 years, the prevalence of autism in the U.S. has increased 277 times. Studies on the prevalence of autism have been conducted in at least 37 countries. All of them show similar trends. Today, 1 in 100 children worldwide is diagnosed with autism in early childhood. At the current rate of progression in the coming decades, every second child will be born with autism. Every second child. Trap for humanity.
In 1970, autism spectrum disorder affected just 1 child per every 10,000. Today, it's 1 in every 36. That's just not an increase alone. It's a crisis. If this trend continues, what does the future hold? Will every second child face this disorder? We can't ignore this problem any longer. And my question is, well, what is causing this crisis and how can we stop it? Let's take a closer look.
Autism, or autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a neurological and behavioral condition characterized by difficulties in social communication, repetitive behaviors, and restricted interests.
Children with autism spectrum disorders and their families face numerous challenges in their lives. In everyday situations, especially when it comes to socializing, which simultaneously affects social interaction, communication, adaptation, and more. Such children often struggle with recognizing facial expressions, like understanding language or tone of voice, and they also have trouble with social engagement, expressing their requests and needs. They show a lack of spontaneous interest in communicating with others, limited use of speech, and sometimes even an unusual way of using it.
Autism is considered a disorder caused by a mix of genetic and environmental factors, with a significant portion of cases linked to genetic predisposition. Upon closer examination of the genetic causes of autism, it becomes clear that about 80% of them remain unknown or are multifactorial. This raises the question, could the environment play a significant role in this process? In recent decades, the natural environment around us has undergone significant changes. It has become heavily contaminated with various harmful substances, heavy metals, pesticides, and toxins. At the same time, the planet is experiencing a profound climate crisis. All these factors may have significantly contributed to the rise in diseases. But there is another hidden and insidious enemy, one that is not yet making global headlines, but its impact is undeniable. This is micro and nanoplastics. No matter where we take samples, water, air, soil, it is everywhere. We eat it, we drink it, we breathe it in. And the greatest danger lies in its ability to penetrate our bodies down to the molecular level. A comparison of graphs and a clear correlation urge a deeper investigation into the role of plastic pollution in the development of autism. Every year, the world produces over 400 million tons of plastic waste. According to projections, this figure will triple by 2040. Plastic requires 500 to 1,000 years to decompose. The Environmental Protection Agency has stated that nearly 100% of all plastic ever created by humans still exists. This waste does not disappear. It continues to accumulate, including in the human body. The film Anthropogenic Factor in the Ocean's Demise presents evidence that today, the entire world ocean is permeated with microplastics. These tiny particles infiltrate every drop of oceanic water. Just as 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with water, the human body is also made up of 70% water. Not only is every drop of the ocean filled with nanoplastics, but these nanoplastics are also present in our bodies. Where do micro and nanoplastics come from? Microplastic particles are formed when various types of plastics break down. When plastic enters the ocean, it is exposed to sunlight and friction, causing it to disintegrate into tiny particles invisible to the naked eye. But the process doesn't stop there. It continues breaking down further, all the way to the molecular level. These particles, known as micro and nanoplastics, retain their polymer structure. Beyond their polymer composition, micro and nanoplastics also contain various hazardous substances typically added during plastic production. On top of that, micro and nanoplastics act like sponges, absorbing dangerous chemical compounds. As a result, bisphenols, phthalates, dioxins, heavy metals, and other pollutants enter living organisms, along with the microplastic particles. This ability of microplastics is known as the Trojan horse effect. Escaping them today is nearly impossible. Toxic additives are everywhere. For instance, phthalates are found in vinyl flooring, stretch ceilings, shower curtains, and children's toys. Bisphenol A, another common plastic additive, is present in water bottles, including baby bottles, reusable food containers, medical instruments, dental fillings, paper, and cardboard. While toxic substances are harmful, the greatest threat comes from plastic's ability to accumulate static charges and retain them in the body. But more on that later. Microplastics are everywhere. Particles of micro and nanoplastics are tiny plastic fragments that have become new inhabitants of our planet. Wind and precipitation carry microplastics even to the most remote corners of the Earth. They're everywhere, from the highest point, Mount Everest, to the deepest Mariana Trench. The entire world ocean is saturated with microplastics. Every drop of ocean water contains these tiny plastic particles. As water evaporates, microplastics rise into the atmosphere from the ocean's surface and can be carried by the wind across the entire planet. They also become part of the sea breeze we breathe. Each year, approximately 136,000 metric tons of microplastics are blown on shore by the sea breeze. Now, when we swim in the ocean, sunbathe on the beach, or jog along the shore in an effort to stay healthy, we're only increasing the impact of microplastics on our bodies. Micro and nanoplastics rising from the surface of oceans and seas are dispersed throughout the atmosphere. Forests, like sponges, absorb them. Poor ventilation beneath dense forest canopies leads to a constant buildup of these particles in the treetops. Unlike forests, cities have good airflow, and the air doesn't stagnate. Additionally, heavier suspensions from vehicle exhaust and industrial smog partially settle micro and nanoplastics. The air in forests is far more dangerous to human health than in megacities due to an excess of nanoplastics. Research has shown that over 14 months, more than 1,000 tons of plastic particles fell with precipitation in 11 national parks and reserves in the western United States, enough to produce 120 million plastic bottles. A similar situation is observed in other countries. The Quercus serrata forests of Japan trap approximately 420 trillion airborne microplastics per year in their canopies, said Natsu Tsunaga. Plastic pollution is detrimental to tree functioning, causing oxidative stress and reducing the efficiency of photosynthesis. Because of this, some of the solar energy is no longer used to create nutrients, and excess light can damage plants, almost like burning them. To protect themselves, trees activate photoprotection mechanisms, dissipating excess light as heat. Microplastics from Africa and North America have been found in the French Pyrenees, in the air at an altitude of 2,877 meters, 9,439 feet above sea level, and even in croissants on the Champs-Élysées. Researcher Emily Rowlands noted that the concentration of microplastics identified in Antarctica was 100 times higher than previously estimated. Micro and nanoplastics enter urban water bodies through stormwater runoff, industrial emissions, and even rain, which captures these particles from the air. For example, a single wash of synthetic fabrics can release up to 1.5 million microplastic particles into wastewater. Once in the wastewater, these particles flow into rivers and oceans, where they are ingested by fish and other aquatic creatures. Ultimately, the microplastics come back to humans, ending up on their plates in the form of fish or seafood. Italian scientists have discovered that fruits and vegetables also contain millions of microplastic particles. They found that microplastic particles enter plants through their root systems, along with water during irrigation or rainfall. These particles travel up the stems and accumulate in the leaves and fruits. Their study, published in the journal Environmental Research, revealed that the highest concentrations of microplastics are found in apples, pears, carrots, lettuce, and broccoli. Moreover, the concentration of particles in fruits was 2 to 3 times higher than in vegetables, ranging from 52,000 particles per gram in lettuce to 223,000 in apples. Scientists from the University of Newcastle, Australia, set out to determine how much plastic a modern person consumes. They found that on average, a person ingests 250 grams of plastic per year, equivalent to 50 plastic bags. Penetration of plastic particles into the brain.
As we've just seen, micro and nanoplastics are everywhere, in the air, the water, food, and as a result, inside of us as well. What about healthy eating? A vegetable or fruit smoothie for breakfast is no longer just a source of vitamins. It's a dose of toxins we unknowingly prepare ourselves for. Fruits and vegetables, even those grown in eco-friendly conditions, cannot escape from the contamination from micro and nanoplastics. With every breath, we inhale nanoplastics. And because they don't break down, they accumulate in our organs, including the brain. Let's dive deeper into what this really means.
The human body is equipped with a unique protective mechanism, without which we would be vulnerable to countless diseases. This mechanism safeguards the most critical organs, the brain and spinal cord. The blood-brain barrier is an incredibly complex and vital system within our brain. It carefully filters substances traveling from the bloodstream into the brain, shielding it from toxins and infections. This barrier is made up of specialized cells that form tight junctions, preventing harmful substances from reaching the brain. The blood-brain barrier doesn't just block everything indiscriminately. Its function is finely tuned, ensuring a balance between protection and supplying the brain with what it needs. But even this remarkable natural mechanism has proven powerless against human-made pollutants. Scientists have discovered that micro and nanoplastic particles, once inside the body, can cross the blood-brain barrier, entering the brain directly from the bloodstream. Research has shown that nanoparticles can breach this barrier just a few hours after entering the body. Moreover, there's another route for micro and nanoplastics to reach the brain. When we inhale air through the nose, nanoplastic particles travel along the olfactory nerves directly to the brain area responsible for smell processing. As a result, they take a shorter and more direct path to the brain than to other organs. This explains why brain tissue samples were found to contain 7 to 30 times more microplastics than samples from the liver and kidneys. The predominant particles in the brain were tiny fragments or flakes of polyethylene, one of the most widely used plastics in packaging. Essentially, the brain of a modern human is turning into a plastic waste bin, the equivalent of an entire plastic spoon. That's roughly the amount of microplastic in our brains. The concentrations we saw in the brain tissue of normal individuals, who had an average age of around 45 or 50 years old, were 4,800 micrograms of plastic particles per gram, or 0.48% by weight. That would mean that our brains today are 99.5% brain, and the rest is plastic, explained Matthew Kempen, lead researcher from the University of New Mexico. How does our body respond to such an invasion? Nanoplastics, penetrating the blood vessels of the brain, trigger inflammation of the inner vascular lining, the endothelium. When inflammation occurs, the blood-brain barrier becomes more permeable, making it easier for various pathogens like viruses, bacteria, and microplastics to enter the brain. Immune cells engulf these foreign plastic particles, but since plastic doesn't break down, it causes these cells to deform and increase in size. Accumulating in the brain's small blood vessels, they contribute to the formation of microthrombi, which disrupt blood supply and microcirculation, increasing the risk of stroke even at a young age. As a result, nanoplastic particles impair the supply of oxygen and nutrients to brain cells, leading to chronic hypoxia and the gradual death of neurons. These processes drive neurodegenerative changes, including brain atrophy, which, with prolonged exposure, can lead to a reduction in the volume of specific brain structures. Due to their tiny size, nanoplastics can even penetrate inside nerve cells, neurons. Once inside, they cause oxidative stress, which disrupts mitochondrial function, the transport of substances across cell membranes, and can lead to DNA strand breaks. In response to such damage, the cell activates self-repair mechanisms, but if the damage is too extensive, the repair system begins to falter, either fixing DNA incorrectly or failing to correct errors altogether. As a result, mutations occur in the cells. This leads to disrupted cellular processes and, ultimately, cell death. Nanoplastics also damage the myelin sheath structure of axons, impairing the transmission of nerve impulses between neurons. This results in memory decline and cognitive impairment, ranging from mild disturbances to severe forms, including dementia. According to research, individuals with dementia had 3 to 5 times higher concentrations of microplastic in their brains than healthy individuals. This may be linked to their habit of spending time in nature, breathing in sea breezes or forest air saturated with microplastics. Moreover, exposure to micro and nanoplastics contributes to the development of Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and encephalopathy. It also increases the risk of neuropsychiatric disorders, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism. This isn't surprising, as autism is tied to disruptions in the formation of neural connections and synaptic signaling. Most studies suggest that things will only get worse. Between 2016 and 2024, over just 8 years, the amount of plastic in the human brain increased by 50%. Given the ongoing rise in plastic production and the growing presence of its particles in the atmosphere, water, and food, it's safe to say that the amount of nanoplastics in our brains will continue to increase. If this trend persists, then in 4 years, plastic levels in the brain will rise by another 50%. That means by 2028, alongside the plastic spoon in our brains, there will be a plastic fork as well. This illustrates the scale of the problem and its alarming consequences for our health. Changes in the microbiota.
You see, when microplastics reach the brain, they trigger inflammation and damage neurons responsible for our thoughts, our emotions, and our basic communication. Imagine trying to make a phone call, but the circuits are damaged. The signal keeps breaking and the connection is lost. That's what microplastics do to our brain. Another alarming trend is that diseases like dementia, once considered exclusive to the elderly, are now increasingly affecting younger and younger people. Nanoplastics, they interfere with brain function, impairing cognitive abilities, memory, and attention. Every time we forget where we left our keys or we struggle to concentrate, it could be a warning sign and an indication that nanoplastics are already accumulating in our brains at levels that are already causing destructive effects on our neurons. And if we fail to take this issue seriously, our brains may undergo irreversible changes that could severely impact their function. You might ask, well, you've explained how nanoplastics accumulate in the brain and cause harmful processes there, but what about the other organs? Don't they get affected too? Well, let's find out.
The gut is often called our second brain. Recent research suggests our gut microbiomes also affect brain communication and neurological health. Certain neuropsychiatric disorders are accompanied by an imbalance in gut flora. Scientists have been able to identify children with autism with up to 82% accuracy simply by analyzing their gut microbiota and digestive system functions. These children show changes in their gut microbiome composition, including alterations in bacteria, viruses, and fungi. But what's behind this connection? Micro and nanoplastics can carry an electrostatic charge. It turns out that some microorganisms can use these charged micro and nanoplastic particles as a convenient platform for growth, much like plants rooting on rocks. Bacteria and fungi are particularly successful colonizers of such surfaces, and the electric fields around nanoplastics can influence biological processes, encouraging the rapid proliferation of fungi. This means nanoplastics support the survival of bacteria, viruses, and fungi, acting as a kind of charging station for these microorganisms. In studies conducted on water fleas, Daphnia, in 2023 at the Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium, researchers found that nanoplastics caused oxidative stress and genotoxicity in their bodies. This facilitated fungal infections in the system. Specifically, the infection rates of the fungal parasite Mechnicobia were 11 times higher in the presence of nanoplastics. New data indicate that the incidence and geographic range of fungal diseases are expanding. Emerging from the shadows of the bacterial antimicrobial resistance pandemic, fungal infections are growing and are ever more resistant to treatments, becoming a public health concern worldwide, said Dr. Hanan Balki, Assistant Director General for Antimicrobial Resistance at the WHO. Some studies suggest that certain fungi can release metabolites or substances that may accelerate tumor growth or contribute to inflammatory processes linked to cancer development. The DNA of specific fungal species is fairly common in certain types of tumors. The body's ecosystem is an incredibly complex network of interactions, where the balance of different microorganisms plays a crucial role. When charged plastic particles interfere with this system, they can promote the excessive growth of certain organisms like fungi while suppressing others. It's similar to a situation where weeds suddenly overtake a garden, crowding out beneficial plants. Additionally, the impact of plastic particles on cell membranes and the buildup of toxins can weaken the body's immune system, making it more susceptible to pathogenic fungi and bacteria. And so, statically charged particles are not just inert pieces of pollution. They actively interact with cells, triggering mutations, creating favorable conditions for fungal growth, and potentially disrupting the microbiological balance of ecosystems. Their influence sets off a chain reaction of changes, the full consequences of which have yet to be fully explored. Viruses and nanoplastics.
Bacteria. It uses micro and nanoplastics as a platform to travel through the human body, embedding themselves deep within the systems. These tiny particles are not just waste, they create the perfect breeding ground for harmful microorganisms. You see, plastic, it has the ability to accumulate an electric charge, allowing it to serve as a host for viruses, bacteria, and fungi. In this way, nanoplastics act as sort of a power bank for these microorganisms, not only helping them survive, but also accelerating their mutations, making them more aggressive and adaptive to new conditions. This explains what we are seeing, not just a rise in acute and chronic diseases, but also their worsening severity and increasing resistance to treatment. Once inside the body, nanoplastics disrupt the balance of the microbiome, a key factor in disease development. The pollution weakens our immune systems, leading to a surge in neurological and viral illnesses. But what if microplastics are not just a platform for bacteria, but also a medium for the spread and mutation of viruses? What does this mean for our health and for the environment?
Numerous plastic particles floating in rivers and lakes attract viruses to their surfaces. These pathogens not only find a safe haven, but also a small, high-speed vessel that carries them over long distances. Viruses that attach to micro and nanoplastics can remain infectious for longer, and thanks to staying on these surfaces for extended time, they may develop new genetic variations. Such conditions can enhance their contagiousness and lead to the emergence of new properties. Plastic particles collect viruses on their surfaces through chemical bonds, electrostatic forces, and hydrophobic interactions. This makes the viruses more resistant to external factors like ultraviolet radiation, temperature, or chemicals, thereby prolonging their infectiousness. Professor Richard Quilliam, lead researcher at the University of Stirling, said, "We found that viruses can attach to microplastics, which allows them to survive in the water for 3 days, possibly longer. Being infectious in the environment for 3 days, that's long enough to get from the wastewater treatment works to the public beach," said Quilliam. In other words, viruses attached to nanoplastics can remain infectious longer than they would in a free-floating state. nanoplastics can transport viruses over great distances through air, water, and living organisms. We weren't sure how well viruses could survive by hitchhiking on plastic in the environment, but they do survive, and they do remain infectious. Microplastics can influence how viruses interact with host cells by altering the conditions of their environment. For example, nanoplastics may weaken the protective mechanisms of cells, potentially making it easier for viruses to multiply. Moreover, microplastics can create conditions for interactions between viruses and bacteria, facilitating the exchange of genetic material. This could increase bacterial resistance to antibiotics. Such processes may contribute to the spread of pathogens and increase the risk of emerging infectious threats. The microplastic threat to emerging life.
So we've already seen how viruses and bacteria use micro and nanoplastics to spread and mutate, but that's only part of the problem. The very air I'm breathing right now contains not only microscopic plastic particles, but also viruses and bacteria. This means I'm not only inhaling micro and nanoplastics, but also pathogens that can actively affect my body. If microplastics are so pervasive that they even sustain the survival of pathogens, then it's likely that they enter the human body at its earliest stages of life. But how exactly does that happen?
The first 1,000 days of life, from conception to the age of 2, are critical for the development of the brain and the entire body. During this period, special mechanisms regulate gene activity, which can be activated or suppressed by external factors such as nutrition, stress, and the environment. These changes can affect not only the individual, but also their children and grandchildren. In this time, the foundations are laid for brain function, the immune system, metabolism, and even psychological traits. Parental health plays a vital role in the health of their child. In 2020, a study led by Antonio Ragusa examined 6 women with normal pregnancies. Scientists analyzed their placentas using Raman microspectroscopy. It turned out that the placentas of 4 of these women contained 12 microplastic particles each, measuring between 5 and 10 micrometers, with varying shapes and colors. 3 of them were identified as polypropylene, while the others contained pigments used in paints, adhesives, cosmetics, and hygiene products. Scientists discovered that micro and nanoplastic particles, once inside placental cells, cause oxidative stress, leading to programmed cell death, inflammation, and disruptions in endocrine metabolism within human placental cells. All of this suppresses intrauterine fetal growth to varying degrees, depending on the amount of nanoplastics in the body. As we already know, the body's protective mechanisms perceive microplastics as foreign substances, triggering local immune responses. This disruption of immune balance leads to various issues in early pregnancy, including spontaneous abortion, fetal growth restriction, preterm delivery, and stillbirth. The reason is that penetrating the fetus, nanoplastics accumulate within it, causing the mother's body to reject it. Studies of aborted fetal tissues paint a grim picture. The significant presence of nanoparticles in the fetus triggers pregnancy termination, fetal rejection, and a range of pathologies, acting like an invisible enemy that destroys life before it even begins. This also explains difficulties with conception. Men's reproductive health is likewise affected by the toxic impact of plastics. Research by Chinese toxicologists in 2024 revealed that sperm is even more sensitive to the accumulation of pollutants than blood. Scientists found microplastics in all semen samples, with an average of 2 particles per sample, measuring up to 7.02 micrometers. Polystyrene was the most prevalent type, appearing in 31% of cases. Scientists also observed sperm morphological abnormalities in the presence of microplastics, as well as changes in telomere length. Short telomeres are linked to accelerated cell aging and impaired functioning, which can affect reproductive health and lifespan. Similarly, microplastics accumulate in the ovaries, reducing follicle size and embryo production. A study by Korean scientists experimentally demonstrates the impact of microplastics before and after birth as a potential risk factor for autism spectrum disorders. Autism is considered a neuropsychiatric disorder, meaning it emerges during the early stages of brain development. It turns out that the preconditions for autism arise not only before a person's birth, but even before their conception. Micro and nanoplastics are found in seminal and follicular fluids, as well as in the placenta and umbilical cord blood, which indicates their potential presence in the embryo from the earliest stages of development. This period is critical, as it lays the foundation for the future child's body. Exposure to nanoplastics at this stage can cause significant harm to the embryo, potentially affecting its further development. Starting from the embryonic period and the first years of life, the human nervous system takes shape. Proteins play a key role at every step of this process. It's known that changes in the structure and functioning of proteins in nervous tissues are particularly significant in the development of numerous disorders, including autism. Recent studies have shown that nanoplastics interact with proteins mainly through weak interactions, such as hydrophobic interactions, hydrogen bonds, van der Waals forces, and electrostatic forces. As a result of these interactions, protein molecules deform in the presence of nanoplastics. This can lead to severe developmental defects, including brain, heart, and bone abnormalities. Right after birth, newborns are exposed to new doses of nano and microplastics, now from the outside world. Infants explore the world by tasting everything they encounter. This makes them especially vulnerable to ingesting microplastics. Nearly everything made for children, from colorful toys to bright dishes and furniture, is made of plastic. According to a 2020 study, infants can ingest up to 4.5 million plastic particles per day simply by being fed from polypropylene bottles. These bottles make up the majority of baby bottles used worldwide. But even if a child isn't drinking from a plastic bottle, it doesn't shield them from microplastics entering their bodies. Infants can also ingest microplastics through breast milk. A 2022 study revealed that plastic particles were present in 76% of breast milk samples taken from 34 healthy mothers. With this trend of plastic contamination, the concentration of these particles in breast milk is only expected to rise. It was also discovered that the level of certain microplastics in the feces of infants is 14 times higher than in adults. The high concentration of nanoplastic particles has a destructive impact on a child's body. As a result, new generations will become increasingly prone to genetic mutations and disorders. Endocrine disruptors.
Our babies undeservedly receive their first dose of plastic even before birth from parents whose bodies have accumulated these particles. We are literally passing plastic onto our children. And this is just the beginning of the problem. Plastic is not just harmless bits of polymer. Every single type is coated with dyes and contains countless toxic additives. And these chemicals from these additives, they don't just disrupt cellular function, they accumulate in the body and they lead to long-term consequences we have yet to fully understand.
In 1891, Russian chemist Alexander Dyanin synthesized an organic compound from the phenol class, bisphenol, through a reaction of acetone with phenol in the presence of a catalyst. 45 years later, in 1936, it was discovered that bisphenol is a synthetic analog of estrogen, one of the 4 female hormones. While bisphenol proved unsuitable for medical use, it became a real breakthrough in plastic production. Dr. Peter Machnik states the following: It is well known that numerous disorders in the nervous system of vertebrates are triggered by the fact that excitatory signals and inhibitory signals are not or only inadequately coordinated. So, it is all the more alarming that the plasticizers BPA and BPS significantly impair precisely this coordination. When the harmful effects of bisphenol A were proven, companies began phasing it out, often replacing it with bisphenol S-based compounds. Bisphenol S was developed as a substitute for bisphenol A, but has a similar chemical structure. It is used in thermal receipt printing, plastics, and packaging. This compound shares much of the same structure and chemical composition as bisphenol A, and causes many of the same problems. People use this chemical to replace BPA without sufficient toxicological information, says Kyung-ho Choi, an environmental toxicologist at Seoul National University. A group of scientists led by Wade V. Welshons found that high concentrations of bisphenol S produce the same effects as bisphenol A. When the brain cells are exposed to small amounts of BPA or BPS for a month, the damage is unmistakable, says Elizabeth Shermer, a doctoral student from Bayreuth and an author of a study on bisphenols. It turns out that the plasticizers influence the action potential of brain cells. They alter the chemical and electrical transmission of signals through the synapses. In addition, plasticizers disrupt pathways that are crucial for perceiving and processing acoustic and visual stimuli. Biologists from the University of Bayreuth warn, the findings obtained through studies on fish brains justify the assessment that BPA and BPS can also seriously damage the brains of adult humans. Studies published by the Earth Day Project in 2023 found higher levels of phthalates and bisphenol A in children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder compared to children without this condition. What are the mechanisms behind the influence of these substances? In the body, bisphenol mimics the hormone estrogen, disrupting critical processes such as cell growth, repair, reproduction, and fetal development. Although estrogen is known as a female sex hormone, it plays an important role in men as well. Research by Australian scientists at the Florey Department of Neuroscience and Mental Health in Melbourne revealed a striking finding. Boys whose mothers had high levels of bisphenol A in their urine during late pregnancy were 6 times more likely to exhibit autism symptoms by the age of 11 compared to boys whose mothers had lower BPA levels. Professor Anne-Louise Ponsonby explained, BPA can disrupt hormone-controlled male fetal brain development in several ways, including silencing a key enzyme, aromatase, that controls neurohormones and is especially important in fetal male brain development. This appears to be part of the autism puzzle. This may help explain the gender disparity in autism, where there are approximately 4 to 5 boys diagnosed per every girl. This suggests a potential decline in the male population due to this disorder and the concurrent rise in male infertility. The study also found that bisphenol levels in infertile men were twice as high as those in men with normal reproductive capabilities. While autism is less common in girls, they suffer from it in a more severe form. Additionally, BPA exposure in girls may lead to hormonal imbalances, particularly disruptions in estrogen levels. This increases their risk for conditions such as breast cancer, endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, and other disorders. Exposure to plastic chemicals during pregnancy has already been shown in some studies to be associated with subsequent autism in offspring, said Professor Anne-Louise Ponsonby, head of Florey's Neuroepidemiology Research Group. Every year, 8 million tons of bisphenol A are produced worldwide, with 100 tons released into the biosphere annually. This makes bisphenol A ubiquitous in the environment, found everywhere from surface water to breast milk. Other organs in the body targeted by microplastics.
Human Human hormones are gradually being replaced by plasticizers, and it's happening unnoticed. We are getting sick without even realizing it. Nano and microplastics are silently destroying us from within, reducing cognitive abilities and triggering autoimmune and hormonal disorders. With every single breath, this process worsens. It is becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish common illnesses from those caused by nanoplastics. More and more people, regardless of age, are experiencing headaches, panic attacks, depression, sleep disorders, obesity, and diabetes. These symptoms are rising in parallel with the increasing levels of nanoplastics in our environment. But why are conventional medications losing their effectiveness? We treat the symptoms, yes, but they keep coming back. Why are milder conditions progressing into chronic or more severe diseases?
Microplastics have been detected in nearly all human tissues, including hair, lungs, kidneys, liver, and spleen. They have also been found in meconium, breast milk, placenta, blood, and urine. Exposure to phthalates, which are present in plastics, increases the risk of developing childhood cancers by 20%. Specifically, the incidence of bone cancer has tripled, while the rates of lymphoma and blood cancers have doubled. It is projected that by 2050, the number of new cancer cases will rise by 77%. Studies confirm that chemical additives in plastics contribute to developing obesity. According to the World Health Organization, the worldwide prevalence of obesity more than doubled between 1990 and 2022. It has also been proven that exposure to bisphenol A is associated with an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Research indicates that exposure to micro and nanoparticles leads to higher blood glucose concentration and insulin resistance. Diabetes-related mortality increased markedly worldwide. Nanoplastics affect not only the brain but also the bone marrow, where they accumulate and interfere with stem cell formation. Stem cells, like universal builders within our bodies, have the remarkable ability to transform into any type of cell. They form red and white blood cells, platelets, as well as cells that can transform into bone, cartilage, and fat tissues. By damaging stem cells, nanoplastics cause irreparable harm to all the body's organs and tissues. Studies have shown that micro and nanoparticles in arteries are a significant risk factor for cardiovascular diseases. These particles harm blood cells, weaken the immune system, and trigger inflammation and vascular damage. Nanoparticles disrupt the normal function of blood proteins and cause red blood cell and platelet aggregation, which can lead to thrombosis, heart diseases, and vascular conditions. Research also indicates that microplastics can accumulate in atherosclerotic plaques within carotid arteries, increasing the risk of heart attack and stroke. The world has changed.
We should not be afraid to proclaim the truth, even if at times it is uncomfortable.
Pope Francis.
Micro and nanoplastics are not just environmental pollutants. They pose a serious threat to the health of every one of us. These substances infiltrate our bodies, disrupting cellular and molecular functions, and the consequences are already visible. For example, in the US, 1 in every 36 families is affected by autism spectrum disorders, and the numbers continue to rise. We are also witnessing a growing infertility crisis, which impacts not only individual lives, but the future of society as a whole. Strokes and cardiovascular diseases, once considered illnesses of old age, are now increasingly diagnosed in people in their 30s and 40s. We are losing control over the surge in neurodegenerative diseases caused by nanoplastic, forcing us to confront profound questions about the future. This means humanity is on an inevitable path toward decline, and this is only part of our problem.
We are caught in a trap. On one hand, we are accelerating the pollution of the planet and our lives with plastic. And on the other, we are unable to combat the consequences of this contamination. We are standing on the brink of an ecological and social catastrophe that is no longer something abstract. It is a very real threat to our survival. Each day, we lose the capacity needed to counteract these challenges. A healthy lifestyle will not save us. Micro and nanoplastics are so small that they infiltrate the soil, rivers, oceans, and water supply systems. There is no escape from this pollution. They are in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and even in breast milk. These particles can even penetrate through our skin. Every day, the amount of this contamination grows. No matter what we do, eating only organic food, drinking pure spring water, wearing clothing made of natural materials, we all breathe the same air saturated with microplastics. The world has changed, but we have not yet realized it. What was once considered healthy food has turned out to be more harmful and dangerous than what was once labeled unhealthy. The damage caused by nanoplastics in a carrot, cabbage, or apple is far greater than the harm from carcinogens in a steak or a burger with fries. This is because the plastic that destroys us from within is far more dangerous than carcinogens. Even something as simple as being by the sea has become hazardous. The sea breeze, which once revitalized us, now carries with it a fresh dose of nanoplastics. Sunbathing on the beach or swimming in the ocean exposes our bodies to even more of these particles. They infiltrate through our breath, our skin, and even our sweat glands, affecting our entire system. And high temperatures only amplify this effect.
This information may be difficult to accept because we've always believed that a walk in the forest or a trip to the beach is good for our health. We eagerly head to the shore for fresh air, to escape, to nature, to unwind from city life. But now, these simple joys may be turning against us. More and more, after such trips, people experience unexplained fatigue, frequent colds, or even serious diagnoses. The reason? Micro and nanoplastics absorbed through the air, water, and even the sunlight affect people. The desire to relax and enjoy life fades into the background when the first signs of intoxication appear. Even something as simple as taking a walk with your child in the woods or by the sea, once considered beneficial to us, now can pose a risk to our health. Living by the ocean or even in the forest has become more dangerous than living in a metropolis. The places we once turned to for refuge from urban smog are now home to an invisible enemy that slowly but relentlessly destroy our health. Microplastics infiltrate our bodies, causing fatigue, depression, frequent illnesses, and chronic diseases. We don't yet realize that these symptoms are linked to plastic exposure, but they most certainly are. And the most terrifying part, there is no escape. It's clear that our old habits are dangerous now. The world we once knew has completely changed. And if we want to survive, we must change too.
Urgent measures. The first step toward restoring ecological balance should be the widespread adoption of atmospheric water generators, AWGs. These devices produce drinking water from the air, effectively filtering out pollutants, including microplastics. If such devices are used universally for all types of consumers, including industrial and household needs, they could significantly purify the atmosphere and oceans within a few years. Currently, we draw water from reservoirs overloaded with nanoplastics. This is the water we drink and use to prepare food, tea, and coffee. In doing so, we fill our bodies with plastic. However, the concentration of nanoplastics in the atmosphere is much lower, so if we start extracting water from the air instead of polluted water sources, it would help reduce the amount of plastic entering our bodies. But we must also rethink water treatment systems. We need to reconfigure treatment facilities so that used water isn't discharged into reservoirs, but instead directed into the soil. After all, soil contains microorganisms capable of breaking down nanoplastics. Scientists have identified bacteria that can degrade polyethylene and polyethylene terephthalate. In the upper layers of soil, plastic concentrations will remain high, just as they are in water bodies. But as water seeps deeper, it will naturally purify itself. Bacteria living in the soil will break down tiny nanoplastic particles. This is the only realistic and effective method proposed so far to combat nanoplastics. This process not only cleans water but also restores ecosystems, reducing pollution levels in oceans and the atmosphere. The more water we divert into the ground, the more these beneficial microorganisms will multiply. This natural filtration will gradually cleanse the environment. Over time, the water will filter into deeper layers and eventually return to the oceans purified. Moreover, if AWG units are placed in deserts and we extract moisture from the air while redirecting used water into the soil and sand, we could halt desertification and transform deserts into oases. The widespread adoption of AWGs and water filtration through soil will allow us to progressively rid the oceans and atmosphere of nanoplastics. For more details on how AWGs can help clean the planet of micro and nanoplastics, watch the film Water from Air: The Path to Saving Humanity. As the concentration of micro and nanoplastics in the atmosphere and oceans begins to decrease, living organisms, including humans, will also start to cleanse themselves. The cells in the human body have a natural mechanism for regeneration and self-repair. Under normal conditions, the complete renewal of all cells in the body occurs within 7 to 10 years. This means that during this time, most cells in the human body are replaced with new ones. Once the influx of plastic from the outside decreases, the body will begin to eliminate accumulated toxins and microplastics through its excretory organs and lymphatic system. This process will take time, but as pollution levels drop, the external harm to the body will become minimal, making cell restoration actually possible. Of course, alongside this, it's essential to implement globally coordinated programs for the collection and disposal of large plastic waste, as well as to promote conscious consumption and the responsible use of plastic materials. As of today, only 9% of plastic waste is recycled. However, this situation can be changed if recycling plastic becomes economically beneficial. To achieve this, it's important to create conditions where recycling is financially appealing to everyone involved in the process. This would not only open up new economic opportunities, but also help address environmental challenges. Without such incentives, considering current economic realities and human nature, the issue is unlikely to receive the attention and resources needed to resolve it. This film presents just a small fraction of the information available today about the harm caused by plastics. However, even this is enough to grasp the gravity of the situation. Moreover, the information shared here doesn't account for the escalation of climatic disasters. To understand the connection between plastics and climate change, you can refer to the report On the Progression of Climatic Disasters on Earth and Their Catastrophic Consequences on the ALLATRA movement website. The highest value.
In recent years, humanity has invested hundreds of billions into artificial intelligence, hoping to propel our civilization to new heights of technological progress. But I ask, does progress matter if humanity doesn't survive? Within just a generation, every second child will be born with autism. Male fertility will decline and infertility will become the norm. Diseases will spread like epidemics. It no longer matters whether we choose to stop using plastic because it's already inside of us. Nanoplastics have infiltrated our brains, destroying neural connections and reducing intelligence. With each passing year and with each passing day, we are becoming more and more vulnerable. And I want you to face the truth. Nanoplastic pollution is growing exponentially. Can we solve this crisis if we are already struggling to even comprehend it? Can we save humanity while we still have the ability to just think? That is the question only you can answer.
Trap for Humanity.